Hello, my name's Justin Leclue, and I'm here today with
Will Sloan.
And you're listening to the Important Cinema Club. And today, we're talking about a Cannes Film Festival darling, and that's Jane Campion. Were you familiar with her work before doing this podcast,
I'd
Will?
seen a couple of her movies over the years, as you do.
She hasn't released that many.
She just made the sort of movies like, The Piano that you kind of see over the years if you're interested in movies.
Yeah, she's a filmmaker that was always on the outskirts and wasn't something that I would actively go and see.
Could it perhaps be because we're guys?
White guys?
Or just guys?
Yeah, like it hasn't been like appointment viewing. Like looking back, her previous films were like a romantic, kind of very mannered biopic, Bright Star, that came out. Mm-hmm. She did Top of the Lake recently as a TV series. But her real hits were like The Piano and An Angel at My Table.
And particularly The Piano, which was a genuine cultural phenomenon at the time it came out.
Mm-hmm. Like, there's still jokes you can find on like magazines and shit about that defining what art cinema is. Mm-hmm. So Jane Campion grew up in a family of artists. Her parents worked for the theater. When she went to school, she actually wanted to get away from all that, and she studied anthropology because she wanted nothing to do with artists or anything like that because it had been part of her life so much. And then suddenly she got interested in storytelling through what she was studying, and she ended up in film school, where she made a bunch of award-winning shorts. And her first feature film, Sweetie, was already a bit of a sensation in her native New Zealand, which is where she grew up.
And then An Angel at My Table from 1990, the real international breakthrough.
But before we get into that, we're going to do something a little bit different on the Important Cinema Club, which is we're going to advertise for our Patreon at the beginning of the episode.
This is most unorthodox.
So this week we talked about Old Boy and the way that our moral tastes are evolving.
Talk about a shift.
Angel on My Table, Old Boy.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll put some music underneath so people will be able to skip it if they've already subscribed to the Patreon. But if you haven't, $5 a month. Check it out now. You get a new episode every week.
Keep a roof over our head.
So, Jane Campion.
So, I mean, maybe just leading into this, a couple thoughts on Jane Campion and her place in the art house ecosystem. For a long time, I think maybe until Sofia Coppola, Jane Campion was the person you'd think of when you thought female film director. And also she was like the female film director who got movies in the Cannes Film Festival competition. The only one regularly. I don't know, maybe Agnes Varda did every now and then. But, like, you remember that omnibus film, Chacun son cinéma?
Yes.
From 2007? I think she's the only female director a part of that.
Yeah, because we live in a sexist world, and that's crazy.
So, I mean, I kind of went into this week, not having seen a Jane Campion movie in a really long time, wondering why was she the female director who entered that kind of rarefied space in the art house ecosystem? Like, how feminist are her films? Is she appealing in some way to, like, male festival programmers? I wasn't quite sure why. And I guess I was surprised this week finding that I think her films are deeply female.
Yes, they're actually dealing with very complex themes in a way that you wouldn't expect.
They are about ordinary women and experiences that are common to women and issues that are relevant to women. And oftentimes her female protagonists are frankly difficult. Mm-hmm. They're spiky, they can be opaque. So I've been thinking a lot lately because it's been pointed out to me, and I guess I always sort of knew it, but I hadn't really, I must shamefacedly admit I haven't always thought about it, that the default perspective is male.
Yeah, it always is.
And of course we all know that, but when you actually start watching stuff and thinking about it consciously, it becomes embarrassingly apparent. And I think watching these movies this week, they are films in which the default perspective is female.
There's a weird example of that in television where the creator of BoJack Horseman was placing background characters of just no-name extras. And he kept calling all the characters him or move him over there. Mm-hmm. And one of the animators was like, why do you assume he's a man? Mm-hmm. And it's just, you just assume if no gender is given, that person is a man. Because that has been the ruling class forever.
But just think about, like, every movie.
Yeah.
Think about, like, every movie you love.
Because it's all made by men, so that's the perspective they're going to give on it.
Yeah. So anyway, it's great that I finally acknowledged that, the default perspective. It's great that I finally have become woke.
There's like a heavenly light behind your head now.
Yeah.
So let us continue.
My misogyny has been cured.
Us two white men to speak about this very feminine filmmaker.
Yeah. But so, An Angel at My Table. What's this film about?
This film is about a famous New Zealand author, Janet Frame, and the journey she took through her life to get published and stuff like that. and most specifically, the way that she was kind of corralled into mental institutions and treated as a schizophrenic.
She was institutionalized for 8 years, misdiagnosed, underwent literally hundreds of electroshock therapy sessions, and I believe was on the fast track to a lobotomy until she was finally freed from the institution. And she apparently in real life just suffered from some depression and was not actually schizophrenic.
And the film makes a good point of never showing her as you would think of the textbook schizophrenic, to the point that you're a little bit confused, like, why are they putting her in a mental asylum for so long?
But she was somebody who was always a somewhat awkward and withdrawn child, and perhaps remained somewhat awkward and withdrawn for her whole life.
This is a film that I found a little bit surprising because I came to it late in all the movies that I marathoned of Jane Campion. And what I discovered was not the visual kind of opulence of films like In the Cut or Holy Smoke, but a more kind of controlled storytelling.
And not as kind of wildly experimental as some of those later ones. Like, yeah, a movie like Holy Smoke has a lot of like kind of off-the-wall comedy in it. In the Cut, very...
Even the piano stylish. Has like a lot of visual punnery, and there's even like a little bit of animation. And Angel at My Table is really like take a step back and let this story play, specifically because it's, covering a long period of this person's life, to the point that there's 3 different actresses who play her.
It was also originally conceived as a television miniseries, 3 episodes based on her 3 autobiographies, covering her girlhood, her time in the mental institution, and beyond that. So there is something about it that is, I guess, scaled to the small screen, at least visually. It looks good. I mean,
you never feel cramped by like a budget or anything like that.
No, but I mean, compared to some of her later films, it doesn't push anything. It doesn't really underline anything. It's very, I guess, precise in its storytelling. If it seems a little more visually and stylistically static than some of her later ones, it's a movie that kind of lets the material speak for itself.
I have to compare it to Bright Star, which she made in the 2000s, which is that kind of mannered storytelling. They both share the same thing, like the idea that dramatic events like deaths or stuff like that will often happen off screen. Like, it will not dig into like, oh, I just want to let this moment play of how important it is. It'll just very quietly...
And it's very elliptical at times.
Exactly. And, you could associate that with television, but you could also associate it with a level of control, even at this time, her second feature film. It is a long film, which makes sense that it would be 3 episodes being like 2.5 hours.
Yeah. There's a real clarity to the storytelling. And there's not as much editorializing, I think, like directorial editorializing as there is in something like Holy Smoke. It's very kind of simple and clear-eyed, and it's very much about what it's about. It's the story of this woman's life, and it's about the performances that the 3 actresses give, and it puts a lot of faith in that story itself being engrossing and powerful. And also it's a depiction of the mental institution in which she's interned. You can imagine Campion in one of her later movies making that mental institution
Terry Gilliam-ish.
Yeah, very, very Terry Gilliam-ish. But here it's shot very objectively.
Like, the mental asylum, while being a terrible place, it's like, oh, well, this is what it could be. Like, you can imagine that she would be stuck in this awful situation for as long as she was, which was way too long.
It's kind of amazing somebody being trapped there for 8 years and emerging from it and becoming, one of New Zealand's most celebrated authors.
Happening while she was in the mental institution, her book was published, and as the film seems to show us, almost was lobotomized until she won an award.
But my God, like, think of the PTSD you would suffer.
I would just lay in bed until they probably put me in another mental institution.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, she even says in the movie that, like, she doesn't know how it's going to feel now that someone is not taking care of her, which is going to be difficult, but she was able to go through that. I'm not familiar with that author's life. All I can get is from the movie. But it seems like she lived the long and fruitful one, dying in like the late 90s, early 2000s.
2004 she died.
There you go.
So she lived to see this film.
And because this was the last one that I watched in my marathon of Jane Campion films, man, fun for days. I was trying to kind of impose the themes that became prevalent in stuff like The Piano, Holy Smoke, and In the Cut, where those are very clearly about control and the way that control is kind of enforced on people. And even in Angel at My Table, the protagonist is a pawn in everybody's game. The way that she's put in the asylum is like she has no control for herself or agency. And the only agency that she can get is through her writing.
Yeah, well, Campion is clearly very interested in all of her movies about like the power of the gender dynamic or the exchange of power in the gender binary, you know.
And that's what really struck me when I watched The Piano this week. I had never seen it before, so this was the first time for me. And watching it, this is a film that won all the awards. It won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, or did it? It had to split it with
Farewell, My Concubine.
Yeah. Sexist, maybe? It's like, I don't know if we can give a woman a whole Palme d'Or.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Who knows what was going on in the jury room. But she is the only female director to have a Palme d'Or.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Not even a full one. Like,
Yeah.
Come on. And it's also a film that, like, Holly Hunter won an Academy Award for.
So did Anna Paquin.
That's insane to me when I read that.
11, yeah.
Who plays probably the most screechy child in cinema history.
I think she's pretty incredible, to be honest. I mean, well, children are screechy.
They are. That's what I mean, is that like children are unlikable and they're self-involved, just like the character that Holly Hunter plays in this film. For people that haven't seen The Piano, it's Holly Hunter plays a mute woman who, with her daughter, is shipped off by her father to New Zealand, which is currently being colonized by the likes of Sam Neill.
A well-to-do settler.
Who is a little bit shocked and unsure what to do with Holly Hunter, because while she is mute, she is very self-possessed in the sense that she knows what she wants, and that's principally expressing herself through her piano playing.
Yeah, and she's been married off to Sam Neill by her father, although she has a child that she had out of wedlock some years before. And Sam Neill, you know, this very well-to-do guy, says he has no room in his house for the piano that she brought, which was her mother's piano, I think. And so he makes her leave the piano on the beach. And so immediately, the piano is her one and only mode of communication aside from sign language. And he doesn't want that, you know? He doesn't value that.
And so what she ends up doing is starting a relationship with a hunky Harvey Keitel.
Hot bod.
Who is currently playing a kind of translator to the native New Zealanders, who we see very literally are being robbed of their land for things like blankets.
But Harvey Keitel is a white man who has sort of affected the native lifestyle.
Yeah, so he tattooed himself. He's still living in a house. He doesn't live with them. He lives exterior to them.
But he is illiterate.
And he's involved with some, and he kind of speaks their language a little bit.
So he buys the piano from Sam Neill off the beach as kind of a roundabout way to seduce Holly Hunter. And she can come over and he lets her play a certain number of keys on the piano if she'll, for example, lift her dress a little bit or expose a little bit of skin or something like that.
So it was impossible for me to watch The Piano without viewing it through the prism of this being incredibly popular. So every moment that would play out, there would be like cogs and levers in my head going like, okay, what did people connect with that this would be like such a huge hit?
Because it's a difficult film, I have to say.
It is. And I mean, the only way you could really view it is if you kind of brush some stuff away. If you see the poster of The Piano, it's Harvey Keitel very like seductively grabbing Holly Hunter and kissing her on the neck. That's crazy to me after watching the movie.
By the way, how'd you like that scene with Harvey Keitel naked as the camera kind of lovingly objectifies his Tommy Wiseau-ish body?
Well,
kind of lingers on his perfectly sculpted middle-aged ass.
This is a movie that really highlights Jane Campion's obsession, and she said this with herself, about the complexity of desire, in the sense that Harvey Keitel, to my eyes, was never a romantic figure, because right from the get-go, he forced Holly Hunter to do what he wanted to do, and that, like, showing up naked is just kind of sexual blackmail. And then finally, when he discovered that she wouldn't just, like, fall in bed with him, he acted like a sullen child and was like, oh, well, you know, go on your way. I don't want you if you're not going to love me.
Now, meanwhile, in the other corner, you have Sam Neill,
Playing the ultimate nice guy.
Yeah, I was about to say, actually. Very nice guy. All he wants is for her to show him a little bit of affection.
Can't you just see how nice he is and all the stuff that he's doing? Why won't you just return that affection?
And I mean, really, come on. Was it really that bad that he didn't bring that piano back to his house?
Look, he's got a lot of work to do, right? Yeah. He's listening to her. He wants a little bit of affection. That's not too much to ask.
Now, so I gotta say, when I saw this movie when I was 18, I found Sam Neill a more sympathetic character than I do now.
Kind of pathetic, right? Because up to a certain point, he is portrayed as trying to do the nice thing, and Holly Hunter the entire time is rebuffing him and being like, I'm not interested at any point.
And so imagine 18-year-old me, not
a nice guy,
a nice guy, perhaps not as enlightened as I am now.
You tip your fedora to ladies that would walk by and be like, good day.
But kind of thinking, around the time when Sam Neill pulls out his axe and starts cutting off her fingers, being like, well, that was a bad thing to do, but I can kind of see his point of view. And look at Harvey Keitel. What a huge dick, sexually blackmailing her, basically a rapist or close to it.
Even though that in the film Sam Neill also tries to rape her.
Yeah. But who does Holly Hunter fall in love with? It's hunky Harvey Keitel.
But what's funny about that situation is that she still does approach Sam Neill and starts to begin kind of sexual touching, and what ends up happening is that she wants to be in control, and the second that Sam Neill wants to kind of act himself, that's when she pulls back and she wants nothing to do with that. And that's why, at the same time, Harvey Keitel, she becomes interested in him when he's not interested in her, or at least that's the act that he's putting on.
Now, my frustrated reaction to this movie as a teenager, I think I was not alone in that reaction, because when this movie came out, I believe it was pretty divisive, and I believe a lot of the reactions were along gendered lines.
You think that the men were like, why is she so difficult? Why won't you just go with Sam Neill?
Well, I mean, frankly, yes. And also, she is, as a character, difficult. I mean,
she is.
I mean, this is
selfish,
this is a 2-hour movie that gives you, 3 characters, 4 if you count Anna Paquin, but 3 main characters, and 2 of them are bad guys, or, complicated guys. And
bad guys.
And the protagonist, the point of identification, is a mute woman who
knows what she wants. And she wants to go in that direction.
Does she know what she wants all the time?
Not all the time, but she is like a straight arrow that she's going to go towards the goal that she has in mind at that point.
But she's hard to read at times.
She is. And Holly Hunter never plays her big.
And she's not, none of these are characters you want to project yourself onto.
I think that Anna Paquin is a very important kind of piece in the storytelling of this film, because without her, Holly Hunter would seem more of an anti-hero, I guess. You would always be rooting for her.
Yeah, and Anna Paquin is also kind of like her translator to the audience in a way.
And Anna Paquin, as the movie goes along, also sees differently than Holly Hunter does, creating a kind of sympathy for Sam Neill instead of Harvey Keitel. And because all of these things are kind of smashing together, it creates something very difficult to find sympathy with. Because as the movie's wrapping up, you're trying to find what is the right way to go? What is the good ending that will leave the viewer go, oh yes, that's right. Especially when you view it, again, through the prism of this was a massive hit and everybody was talking about it. Were they happy it was the way that it ended up?
I don't know.
Yeah. And that's really interesting to kind of, chew on when you watch it. Especially when, more spoilers, the film ends with Holly Hunter's attempted suicide, that she throws herself in the water with her piano. And then in the final moments, she changes her mind and she goes out of the water, lives with Harvey Keitel, happily ever after. She starts to learn to speak again. Jane Campion a few years ago said, oh no, we shot her dying in the water, which... honestly, that makes the most sense with the movie that we saw.
I would also just add, too, in terms of how difficult the film is. It's an exquisitely beautiful film, but this is a very unpleasant environment to be immersed in for 2 hours. It's this gray, desolate, rainy and muddy New Zealand coast.
Yeah, and unlike An Angel at My Table... Jane Campion in this film is visually playing with stuff. She's creating, very beautiful tableaus. creating visual puns like, Sam Neill has a photo of Holly Hunter in his pocket. Get it? And you see it from the POV of the pocket. He has her in her pocket. This was the first iteration of, while Jane Campion makes very complex films, they're also thuddingly obvious in different ways. Like the scene where Sam Neill is trading land with the native New Zealanders for blankets. Yeah. It's like, now we get it.
But why was this movie so popular? Perhaps it has to do with the fact that it is about the complicated nature of desire and the fact that it is a difficult female protagonist. So that must have seemed very refreshing.
And it was probably the fact that, unfortunately, looking back, was distributed by Miramax Films.
Well, Harvey at the time did have a very savvy sense of how to market this kind of thing.
And, they pushed it hard on audiences, even though the film illustrated all the bad behavior that Harvey Weinstein did himself.
We're coming out strongly anti-Harvey Weinstein on the Important Cinema Club podcast. You heard it here first.
And I also watched Holy Smoke, which is essentially the sequel to The Piano because it's dealing with all the same themes, except in a much more obvious way. And even Harvey Keitel is back.
That was one of those movies I might have seen when I was younger looking for celebrity skin.
And you found some, didn't you?
I think I might have. Another embarrassing admission of a young Will.
So like I said, I'm not going to talk too much about this film, but it's like The Piano, much more goofy and then more serious. And again, a little bit more direct. In that it's
didactic.
It's doing the same stuff, which is about a man that's in control, taking a woman, in this case, a person that has fallen under the thrall of a cult, if you will, in India, and trying to kind of knock it out of her, but at the same time falling in love with her, and the power dynamics changing from scene to scene.
Well, in the movie Harvey Keitel, he's this cult deprogrammer who's also a very macho guy who's very used to dominating women sexually. And then Kate Winslet realizes that she can pull a power play on him by coming on to him sexually, and then after it's over, kind of being very flippant towards him and being like, it wasn't anything.
Yeah.
Using that to triumph over him.
And even then, it gets more complicated after that because Kate Winslet is not sure how to feel about Harvey Keitel, even though he's a pathetic man who at one point punches her in the face.
But it kind of seems a little easier what it's trying to accomplish than what The Piano is.
It's complex in the sense that, I can't believe that this is happening, but it's so much more of a straight line, the way that it gets there.
But the two central performances, I think, are pretty amazing.
Oh, yeah, they're fantastic.
And, very, very naked, not just physically, but also just, these two actors just kind of throw themselves into these
Harvey
roles.
Keitel putting a little bit of makeup on and putting a dress for the last part of the movie.
Yeah.
But this was the film that kind of soured Jane Campion's, I don't want to say brand, but film career. And because she's a woman, if she gets one film that's not received very well, movie jail for you.
Well, though a few years after this, she did make a little movie that we both saw this week called In the Cut.
Now, this is one that's held in a weird place.
I've been seeing some revisionist reappraisals of it lately. It was quite poorly received at the time. I think when it came out, a lot of the focus was on, this is Meg Ryan trying to do a weighty role, and she's naked in it. And also, this was around the time Meg Ryan was getting a lot of Botox, I hate to say it, and that, I think, colored a lot of the media about her at the time.
And I think the people also felt that Jane Campion sold out in a way, because she's just making an erotic thriller, which were very popular, slick ones that were coming around the late 90s, early 2000s.
This is on the very tail end of the erotic thriller genre. In fact, I believe I have in my notes here a feminist spin on the erotic thriller genre.
And what's fascinating about In the Cut is that it's everything that Jane Campion has done up to that point, magnified to 1,000, whether it be the theme she's dealing with or the visual craziness that's going on.
This movie stars Meg Ryan as a New York English teacher who gets entangled in a murder mystery because some of the remains of a murder victim are found outside of her apartment. There's a serial killer going around literally disemboweling women. And
a theme that appears multiple times, the Bluebeard analogy that is also apparent in The Piano.
And she falls in a certain kind of psychosexual relationship with Mark Ruffalo, the alpha male who's leading the police investigation and who she suspects may be the killer.
She shouldn't be in a relationship with him because he's foul-mouthed and doesn't have good political opinions, but she can't stay away.
So I think I didn't particularly like this movie.
I liked it.
Well, there are things about it that I do like, though. It's a movie where I kind of like a lot of what's happening in it, and yet I think as a thriller, it's DOA.
No, yeah. I don't think it works on any level. Like, who is the killer? I can't figure out. Even when it wraps up and it reveals who's been doing this, it's like, okay. And it's done in such a perfunctory way as well.
And stylistically, I think the movie's almost indigestible.
It is hideous.
Yeah.
Like, it's all yellows, and she makes a decision to shoot most of it handheld with the focus shifting throughout shots.
And oftentimes the camera is like hiding behind things, so it's as if we're eavesdropping on all these scenes, which is easier hearing about it than it is to actually experience.
But I think that as a deconstruction of the genre, there is weight in saying that, because it is taking tropes that we usually associate with something as simple as like Basic Instinct or Fatal Attraction and just showing that ugly underside of it.
Well, it's interesting that the man, in this case Mark Ruffalo, is the femme fatale.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that Meg Ryan and her half-sister, Jennifer Jason Leigh, are kind of normal sexual beings.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing particularly extraordinary about their sexuality, except that they have a sexuality, which probably isn't all that. Like, in movies, sex is a rather more momentous occasion oftentimes.
Well, it's something that you build up to, and it's the climactic event, like, oh my god, finally we had sex.
You don't see people with sort of like normal, healthy sexual appetites. And the nature of her relationship with Mark Ruffalo, the fact that he's this crude and terrible man, and yet he clearly is really good at sex, their relationship, what makes it work, it's sort of elliptical, and yet we get it somehow. We get why.
Well, everyone has had that experience or seen that friend where you go like, why are you dating this person?
Yeah.
They are terrible. They treat you like shit. What could you find attractive about them?
Yeah.
But the relationship persists.
Yeah, so that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that movies rarely tackle, because the issue is, well, the audience is not going to buy it. Mm-hmm. Like, why would they continue in a relationship with this person?
And I mean, frankly, when this movie came out, it was very poorly received. And I think a lot of people said the movie's ludicrous.
And it's also, like we talked about the piano, a question of where do your sympathy lie? Because it's not going to lie with Mark Ruffalo, because he's a bit of a jerk. And you would assume they'd lie with Meg Ryan, but why is she getting involved in these situations? Why is she making these decisions? And it's not even on the level of, like, a slasher film where someone makes a decision to go get killed. It's more complicated than that.
But you can also kind of see why she would get with Ruffalo when you see her ex-boyfriend, Kevin Bacon.
A actor who wants to be a doctor, who carries a small dog around.
But like a much more normal, quote-unquote, guy who is also literally stalking her now and like is hateful and angry at her that she broke up with him. You know, another kind of nice guy.
Yeah.
So you can kind of see why after an experience with a guy like that, she would go with Mark Ruffalo, who has the courage of his horrible convictions.
Yeah, he speaks his mind, even if those opinions are awful.
Yeah.
And they never pull away from that either. There's never really a scene where Mark Ruffalo's like, you know, I am really a good guy, and I just don't know how to express myself.
So I don't know, maybe I'm kind of selling myself on this movie now. I'll just say that I found it a bit of an ordeal to watch, and yet it was very interesting.
When I say that I like it, I do enjoy it on one level, but it's not something I'm like all smiles and laughs watching, except for a really goofy flashback that happens involving a couple skating.
I didn't get that at all.
No, me neither. Yeah. Unless you take it literally and the character is being completely immobilized by having her arms and legs cut off.
Right.
Which is a very thuddingly obvious analogy, but maybe that's what it is. Mm-hmm. All right, so after In the Cut, Jane Campion never had anything of the piano scale. Like, if you look at her filmography, she hasn't really made that many movies considering how long she's been working.
But I would say Top of the Lake on TV was a minor comeback. I mean, Bright Star was like a slight art house hit.
And very well received. I watched it. It is what it is. Like, it's very controlled. It's like Jane Campion seemingly playing it safe to prove that, like, you know, I don't have to be as opulent as I was in The Cut. I could just make mannered films as well.
Well, you know what? I remember seeing it, liking it. Can't remember much about it. But, you know, Top of the Lake is a show that a lot of people have seen and a lot of people have talked. I mean, it's the trajectory of a lot of kind of art house filmmakers where the market for that kind of film is drying up, and so they migrate to television.
And if Amazon is not paying for it, and they're not anymore because they said they would only do blockbusters from now on.
Well, fortunately, A Rainy Day in New York is still coming out, baby.
It's difficult for Jane Campion to make feature films, I feel. Mm-hmm. So TV is a good place, especially that it's obvious something like Top of the Lake, or the sequel to that, Top of the Lake, China Girl, she seemingly had a lot of control over. It's 6 episodes. She directed every one. So she does have that opportunity to have an autorial impact on, the art that she's making, which is good.
Great.
TV is the future. One day you're going to have to start watching it, Will. You're going to fight it tooth and nail.
Look, I like TV.
Yeah, Cheers.
The Being Frank Show.
So, as per usual, you can send us letters at importantcinemaclubpodcast@gmail.com. Question, comment, suggestion, we want them all. And we'll probably read them on air. So, this week we have a letter from Brandon Lim, and it goes, "What would Jackie Chan do?" Justin, Will, I've been eagerly awaiting your Jackie Chan Spectacular 100th episode special, and wow, did you guys deliver. I wanted to write you guys a letter and leave an iTunes review like you're always asking your audience to do with increasing desperation. Remember, guys, write us an iTunes review. But I'm finding it challenging to do so as I keep hearing Justin's jovial-sounding voice with each word I type, and it's throwing my train of thought askew. Maybe you could switch things up and have Will read it. His voice seems easier to block out of my head for some reason. Will?
Sure,
it's all yours.
Continue. All right, here I am. One thing from your episode that resonated with me a lot...
I like your voice as jovial as mine.
...was Hollywood's tendency to portray Jackie Chan as the other during the late 90s and early 2000s, when his international stardom was so great that not even America could ignore the chance to capitalize on him. Growing up half Chinese in the 80s, a lot of kids at school would make fun of the other Asian kids in my classes, but would tend to leave me exempt, I think because of my general appearance of whiteness. I never really had the courage to stand up to any of these racist bullies, which I always felt guilty about, but a big part of me learning to accept and take more pride in my Chinese heritage was through watching old kung fu movies with my dad. He used to show me old VHS tapes and laserdiscs of Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan, and in turn I'd invite friends to come over after school to watch them too. I think part of me felt that if other kids could only see how cool and talented Chinese people actually were, they'd be less likely to make fun of them. Films like Drunken Master 2, Project A, and Police Story were in steady rotation, and much like Will described, Jackie almost seemed like some kind of urban myth or folk hero capable of superhuman feats. We would all point at walls, fences, and random parts of buildings and theorize whether or not Jackie Chan could jump off it. And of course, the answer was always yes. I also had conversations like this.
Did you?
Yeah. When he started to break into the American mainstream in the mid-90s, I remembered how exciting it was to see him finally get his dues in the West, despite the fact that he was already in his 40s. Seeing old favorites of his pop up on video rental shelves was very exciting, but also felt a bit awkward revisiting these films with weird English voice dubs and alternate titles.
Well, Jackie Chan did like to dub his own voice a lot.
That's true.
And it sounded not good.
It sounded, like Jackie Chan dubbing his voice in English. When Rush Hour first came out, I remember being so pumped for this film that it was easy to look past the subpar fight choreography and action set pieces that were well below the standards of Hong Kong films decades before. This was also probably the first time Western audiences had been exposed to an Asian male in the lead role since Bruce Lee in Enter the Dragon. And of course, Rush Hour doesn't miss a chance to incorporate every Chinese stereotype in the book. His next string of movies in the US were, needless to say, supremely disappointing. While fans of his previous work longed for the days he might return to form, it became increasingly clear that American directors simply didn't know how to capture the magic that is Jackie Chan. Also, one anecdote from I Am Jackie Chan, that's his autobiography.
His first autobiography.
I'm surprised you neglected to mention was his story he told about being a stuntman extra on the set of Enter the Dragon. Apparently, Bruce Lee hit him square in the head with a pair of nunchucks during filming, and Bruce waited for the scene to finish before running over to him to see if he was okay. Jackie also claims Bruce took him out bowling that night. Anyway, I always appreciated the focus on Asian and Hong Kong cinema you guys show so much reverence for. Your Sammo Hung and Category 3 episodes were definitely favorites.
Category 3 being a Patreon one.
Also, to make this extra creepy, I'm currently writing this as Justin prepares to introduce Don't Panic at the Royal, and Will sits in quiet anticipation for the screening to start. Wow. I was there.
Creepy.
In terms of questions or suggestions, I was scratching my head thinking about a subject to suggest to you guys for future episodes when I noticed that the American Genre Film Archive just recently announced a deal with Shaw Brothers to release theatrical cuts of 30 newly restored Shaw classics. I'm sure this is relevant to your interests, so crossing my fingers that some of these will get a chance to screen here in Toronto, and that you guys will cover some of them. Inframan laser blast screening, perhaps? I think so.
Yeah, probably. I think there's an Inframan print floating around. And when it comes to Shaw Brothers films, that's something that I feel like we couldn't just do a Shaw Brothers episode. We would have to do like a director or even a star or something like that.
I think we could do a Shaw Brothers episode if we did like we could do 36 Chambers Shaolin, the Inframan, like Oily Maniac, and maybe one other thing. But then we could return to the topic later.
Yeah, because there's no Chang-Chi in that. And
that's
very important.
We could do a Chang-Chi episode. We could do all sorts of things.
There's just so much, because the idea of Shaw Brothers
It's like doing a Warner Brothers episode.
Yeah, is that people believe that because its style is very formulaic in the way that it's presented, people see it like, oh, they're all the same, but they're really not.
P.S. Here's a photo of me and Jackie Chan during the time he was here for the Q&A he did during TIFF 2012. We were there.
Yeah, we were.
I remember the event selling out pretty fast and trying to find tickets on Craigslist to surprise my dad with, but was only able to track down one for myself. A couple days after the event, I remember getting a call from my dad that said, "Brandon, Jackie Chan is here having dinner at the restaurant." My family owns a Thai restaurant called Mengray. It was my night off from work, but I dropped what I was doing and took a cab to try to catch him. I realized I didn't have anything for him to sign, so I stopped at Sonic Boom and grabbed the DVD of Drunken Master. By the time I got to the restaurant, he was literally out the door and ready to go, but we convinced his management to get him to come back and take a group photo with our staff. He begrudgingly came back inside. From the midst of the food coma he seemed to be in, threw on that signature Jackie smile, and put his arm around me for one photo. After that, he was out the door again before I had a chance to even ask him to sign the DVD. That's my Jackie Chan story. Thanks for listening. And here's the here's the photo, and it's really cute.
Maybe Jackie Chan is a good man.
Well, I mean, I think Jackie Chan is a man like all of us. He's complicated. He has his good sides and his bad sides. He does seem to be really nice to his fans.
Thank you very much for your letter, Brandon, and thank you very much for coming to Laser Blast as well.
Yeah.
Don't panic. Fun time.
If you folks are ever in Toronto, by the way, listeners, be sure to come to Toronto during a time when Justin and Peter are doing a Laser Blast Film Society screening.
So that's every month, so just check your local listings.
You'll probably see me there, too.
But me and Will do not hang out.
No, we don't. We don't speak.
We have our lawyers have decided that we only have so many hours that we're allowed to speak together a month. So another quick question from Andrew Barr. He goes, "Hey guys, just listened to your top 10 list and was wondering how many of the films on your list were things you actually liked, and how many were things you thought were important films that make you sound like you know what you're talking about."
Is he talking about me?
Just comparing my list to yours, I feel like while I do watch documentaries and the occasional important films, I end up filling my list with goofy junk. I'd like to point out that Andrew Barr, who's a friend of ours, had Impossible Horror on his top 10 list. I'm assuming the difference comes from my not having to prove that I know what I'm talking about when it comes to film, but is it possible I'm just an uncultured oaf?
Perhaps you just have a low opinion of your own taste.
Anyway, thanks for the Ernest-centric episode. It was quite entertaining. Your pal, Andrew. We talked about this a little bit on the previous episode, that top 10 lists at their base, when you release them online for people to see, is only to make you look smart.
Well, there definitely is a performative quality to top 10 lists. But at the same time, like, I resent the bad faith assumption. All I can tell you is, why not see the movies on my list? See if you agree. But I don't know. Like, I don't think I genuinely tried not to overthink the list this year.
You just went through it, see if you could do 10, and you're like, you're good.
Yeah.
Even though that, while I was writing the list out for the website, one of them actually got knocked back because you had seen Phantom Thread before we did the episode.
Well, yeah, my list on David Davidson's website has Logan Lucky at number 10.
Yeah, Logan Lucky, fun film.
Fun film.
Steven Soderbergh's...
sorry, Phantom Thread got on the list, knocked it off.
Steven Soderbergh goes and clicks unsubscribe to the Important Cinema Club. So next week, we're doing a director I actually wanted to do when the Rural Cinema was doing a retrospective of him, but there was too much stuff that came up because we reached 100 episodes at the end of 2017. And that's our man, P.T. Anderson. Not to be confused with the director of Alien vs. Predator, Paul W.S. Anderson. This is another filmmaker that I believe was probably big when you were a teenager.
Yeah.
And has evolved into something interesting. From Boogie Nights and Magnolia to, the Phantom Thread, The Master. There's such a stark difference between both of those, while still kind of holding on to the same themes.
There's a line, there's a continuity in the work, and yet there is a very clear evolution. And I think, guys like us, we look at him and we say, you're our hope for the future.
Is there perhaps a phantom thread connecting them all?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
All right, so that's what we're going to be talking about next week. Until then, my name's Justin McClue.
I'm Will Sloan.
Thanks for listening.
Justin, you ever seen a movie and said, boy, that was 2 hours of my life I'll never get back?
Never.
Wouldn't you love to have a little bit of revenge on the fat cats in Tinseltown who took your money?
Yeah, especially that I am a filmmaker as well, and I appreciate cinema, so I want to punish the people who make bad films.
So, I bet you're a card-carrying member of the Golden Raspberry Association.
Of course I am.
Also known as the Razzies.
And by that, I mean I give them no quarter and do not discuss them at all. Good night, Will. No, they released their list today.
They released their nominations, and, it was as bad as it always is. We said we were going to talk about the Razzies a bit. I wrote 2 tweets about the Razzies today.
You forced yourself.
Well, I could have said more, but I think people take the bait too much, because they are meaningless. They are obviously just this group of kind of like LA fame whores.
Even when you pitched it to me, you were like, we could talk about this. I know, just don't look, Justin.
Yeah, it's got Paul Anka's guarantee, just don't look. But, I mean, I guess they're kind of interesting because they represent a certain point of view for, like, what is bad. Like...
Do they at this point in time?
But they clearly, I don't think they see the movies. Mm-hmm. Because you look at the lists of who are the best actor, best actress nominees, and
worst actress nominees.
Oh yeah, excuse me, worst actor. And like the worst actor nominees are things like Dakota Johnson in 50 Shades Darker.
I mean, she's not the worst.
She's not or Jennifer Lawrence in Mother. And listen, first of all, I think Mother's a good movie. Mm-hmm. Secondly, even if you think it's a bad movie, it's not her fault. Like, she's good at, like, what's wrong with her in that movie? So the reason she's nominated is because, well, she's a famous actress who's had a few flops lately. Mm-hmm. So, like, that's what's bad about her.
Now, the Razzies are weird in this day and age because you would think they would be more relevant than ever because we live in a culture that is there to make fun of stuff.
Yeah.
Like, that is what Twitter is. That is what social media exists to do. But they may also be a relic because it moves too fast now.
Well, their targets are so out of touch. Mm-hmm. They have that category, worst remake, ripoff, or sequel. And that seems like such a relic
of... every movie.
Well, yeah, it's like, that's such a relic of like the early 90s when people were like, oh, look at all these sequels that are coming out. Like, it was a much more novel complaint at the time. Now, you look at the 5 nominated movies, and like, they're a hack organization anyway, but if they wanted to be a hack organization with some aspiration of relevancy, maybe one of their worst picture nominees would be Wonder Wheel. Because I think that movie probably fucking says more about what's wrong with Hollywood than Baywatch does.
Yeah, but they're never going to do that. They're going to pick, like, the big, bloated blockbusters that were popular and don't mean anything.
Yeah.
Because that's easy to make fun of.
Or 50 Shades Darker, because they're sexist.
Exactly.
Because that's a movie which... Like, first of all, nobody's talked about it since it came out a year ago.
Yeah.
So it's not even in the conversation. It's not relevant. So the only reason it's nominated is because it's a movie about sex for older women, which makes it a target.
Yes. I mean, I haven't seen it. Have you?
No.
I mean, I listened to the Flophouse episode on it. Funny
I saw
stuff.
The first 50 Shades of Grey movie, which is utterly mediocre, but not that bad.
And you didn't want to check out the one directed by the man who gave us The Corruptor and Glengarry Glen Ross?
Ooh, you're kind of selling me on that now, I have to say.
I hear there's a giant Chronicles of Riddick poster at one point in the background.
Yeah.
And if there's anything that says Justin the Clue, it's the Chronicles of Riddick.
Yeah.
I just want to note one thing before we go, which is you asked me what the podcast has changed, like what subjects we approach. And somehow I completely blanked on the fact that I had no interest in Canadian cinema pretty much before we did our episode.
What changed? Was it being a filmmaker?
I think that what changed was reading the book on the Genie Awards, which is the Canadian Film Awards. They're currently called the Canadian Screen Awards, and discovering that all these movies that were nominated, that won, no one knows about them, and they're not available. And there's something that just got me at that point, like a frustration. It's not like I believe that these movies are out there and they're just bad. It's that these movies exist and nobody's watching or talking about them or caring about them.
Well, I was kind of frustrated when I saw that movie Loyalties at the Lightbox a few weeks ago at just a free screening on Saturday afternoon, because it's a really good movie by a female director, and it's programmed at the Lightbox in this free slot as if it's homework. I feel like there's a way to get people interested in that movie.
There is, and recently TIFF did an event, because they're doing the Canadian Top 10 right now, which is the top 10 Canadian films. that played at the TIFF Film Festival. That they were having a party where you could come and a bunch of people would edit Wikipedia pages for Canadian cinema. And so I saw this event come up and I went, man, I wonder what kind of person would do that. Like, are there other people like me that are interested in the history and why it doesn't exist? I should go check this out. So I wake up at 11 a.m. on Saturday morning, way too early, and I went down to the TIFF Lightbox and I discovered who else is interested in this. Me. It's me. I was the first one there. There was nobody else for another hour.
Who came? Anyone we know?
Nope. Only 2 other people showed up before I left, and they each went to the other side of the room, sat down, and did their own thing.
Well, thanks for going. I mean, I'm glad somebody's out there, fighting for Canadian culture.
I just believe that there's this idea that, like, there are people fighting for Canadian culture or cinema like that, and I'm getting a little bit, frustrated that I don't know of them. Like, Steve Greystock, who works at TIFF, he was a Canadian cinema guy. But who are the other people right now who, in a time where film should be more available than they ever are just like, meh, people don't want to see these movies?
Well, Justin, the answer is clearly you. And yet, where are the, how come Cameron Bailey isn't knocking at your door? I'm fucking dead serious asking this.
And one other thing that we didn't talk about because it's dumb is resolutions in the new year. I mean, it's something that, when you're a teenager, you're like, I don't need to make those because I'm not going to follow them. And it doesn't really matter. It's an empty gesture.
I have resolutions in my personal life, but I don't want to talk about them here.
But I was thinking about the look on your face when you said that. Just about the way that I take in cinema, I think that one resolution that I made is, 1, watch more Canadian cinema. Because it isn't homework, and you should be experiencing these things so you can share them with other people or realize how important they are and discover more stuff. And number 2 is that you don't gotta be lazy. And that's something that I feel when you can do anything, right? I remember reading on the internet at one point, a guy's like, I'm just gonna watch ninja films now. Because why would I challenge myself? I'm just gonna watch the stuff that I like. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, you get bored by that. And, like, since January 1st, I've been watching a lot of films that I was kind of putting away and going, man, maybe, like, on a rainy day when I'm in the right mood. And kind of forcing myself to watch them. And, man, are they enjoyable. Great stuff.
Well, I mean, I already watched that Robin Williams movie, Man of the Year, for my other podcast, so I think that's all my New Year's resolutions done.
And that was, like, the art film. You're like, listen, this is a medicine. Yeah. I'm going to enjoy this.
Yeah.